for coming on to listen to this important topic during this important time. So the first question that I want to pose to our sister Nisa, and then we'll go to our ma'am Omicron. Sister Nisa, how has it been in Washington D.C.? A lot of the protests have come and marched from your campus downtown. What has been the feelings? What has been the vibe? Can you tell us a little bit how everything's going down? How everything's going? How everything is going within Washington D.C.
So, Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum. So first of all, let me thank Hartford for this opportunity. Let me thank Dr. Mosher, Dr. Yuskayev, my professors there at Hartford, for helping to make me what I am today. Thank you so very much. Howard University has a history of protest, and that is why people came and centered their demonstrations at Howard University. That is really the history of the university, and so people gathered there and marched to the university. Also, the Muslims in the area gathered and organized this past Saturday. Muslim students, Muslim organizations gathered and had a special demonstration on this past Saturday. And they gathered near the Capitol and marched from the Capitol to the White House. People are, of course, very angry. They're very upset, and they have rage. They have rage that they have been holding for a very long time. Because people who have to endure the oppression, people who have to endure the microaggressions and the challenges of being Black and Muslim, that they have to take it day after day after day, and they have to sublimate what they experience. And now this is an opportunity for them to let it out, for them to release the anger and frustration that they have been experiencing over a significant periods of time, and to go someplace with other people who understand what they feel and let it all out. And so they were very excited. Our students were part of the organizing teams for other students in the DC area. Students came from other cities and came to the Washington, DC area. And so they were just enthralled to be there. I was like an emergency contact for students. They asked me, was I coming down there? I said, no, I believe in social distancing, but I will be an emergency contact. So that if something happens, I had 2 phones. They could call me on either phone. I would call a lawyer for you. I would call your parents, but I will not be joining you. So that was, how I was able to help them. So yes, it's, DC is on fire. And plus our mayor, the DC mayor, put the yellow words in front of the White House, Black Lives Matter Plaza. She changed the name of the street to Black Lives Matter Plaza. So, the city is alive with passion about these issues.
All right. Thank you for that. Can we have our brother, ma'am, who was at the epicenter? How was the pulse? What is the vibe? How is the community healing from the immediate effects, and then the aftershocks of everything thereafter?
Brother Imam, you are muted.
I rehearsed that entry for so long, and I just messed it all up there. Goodness gracious. No,
now you're on.
Alhamdulillah. I want to just begin, say assalamu alaikum, may God's peace be with you. And it is an honor to be here on this program hosted by the Hartford Seminary. And it is a distinct honor to be on the same panel as Dr. Nisa Muhammad, one that I haven't met directly, or at least not that I can recall, but have definitely heard of your work and your impact in your work. And I'm just honored to be share the panel with you and many others on this call. Minneapolis is yes, the epicenter. I think that's a very good way to describe it. The events that were here and happened here on the night of May 25th that resulted in the brutal murder, really, of George Floyd, just basically sent city into more. It was something, the more you watch the video and the accounts, you can never get used to this. If you are a human being that has a human pulse and human sensitivities that are in the right place, this is something that you will never be used to. And it's a traumatic experience that is played over and over, particularly in the way the news cycle runs right now, and then all the social media, et cetera. So it was like being inundated and being killed over and over again. You know, I told our congregation on our Friday Jummah address that, you know, I reminded them of something said in the Quran, where Allah says to us that, you know, to kill an innocent life as if you have killed all of humanity, you know, and to save a human life as if you have saved all of it. You'll be very familiar with that. And I felt, and I have felt personally, that a piece of me died with him. A piece of me died that day too. You know, so I was very much in the moment. And I think many of folks, just common people in the street, particularly African-American men and women who have had this historical oppressive relationship with law enforcement in this country, just, you know, saw this as, you know, another chapter, you know, one more again, so to speak. However, in this moment, you know, I agree with the assessment that something about this feels a little different. Something about this feels more. There's something extra here. Not that we hadn't seen this before, but George Floyd is, you know, the proverbial straw that broke the camel's back. You know, the idea that there was this one more thing that just took everybody over the edge. And this is after, you know, Trayvon Martin, Jamar Clark, Philando Castillo, Eric Garner, Sandra Bland, Freddie Gray. This is after this traumatic experience has happened. To play this stuff off over and over and over again. And to see this in just such a way that was without humanity, just visceral is the only thing that I can pull right now to a response into what we've seen. All that to say is that, you know, that's what was all happening within me. and I registered this in the souls of others as well. So this is just a collective spirit, a sea of hurt, a sea of pain, a sea of grief that was very hurtful and sad. But it wasn't short thereafter that this turned into anger and into rage. And you saw the results of this in terms of the uprisings that happened really everywhere in the city at once. You know, you saw the places right at the location that it took place, you know, down on Lake Street where the 3rd precinct, the one that was, you know, burned, I'm sure you saw that. You know, it was in St. Paul, it was everywhere. I mean, it's everywhere at once. I mean, the city, as my sister said, was literally on fire. The city was on fire. And, you know, even today, I was out just for a moment. Many of the stores, the pharmacies, the shops up and down West Broadway, the main thoroughfare throughout the neighborhood, many of those things are still closed down today. But they're full parking lots. The parking lots are full of cars, but there's no stores open. So as you get a little closer, what you see is that there is basically a makeshift kind of tent city that has been set up where organizations, you know, faith communities, churches, et cetera, nonprofits have set up tents in order to distribute basic needs for people because they can't get them. They cannot get them in this moment. And it's just created a very dire situation in this very moment. I would end with this. I'm hopeful through all of this. I'm hopeful due to the response of the community. I think that it has been overwhelming. I think that we've seen, even in this brutal act of violence that triggered all of this, we have also seen some acts of mercy that have come out of this as well. And, you know, even when I'm at my wit's end, which has been quite frequent in this moment, I also encounter something that really restores my hope and leaves that door open, that some light can come in at the same time. So I have to acknowledge that as well, because that also is true for me as well in this moment. So complex time, we have a complex road ahead, but the city is hurting and the city is grieving in this moment.
All right, thank you for that. I wanted to talk now about as ministers, as an imam, you know, as a leader of of like Howard religious life. Also, our doctor like Nisa, you lead the association of like Muslim like chaplains. And I'm wondering, in this time of grief, in this time of national pain and suffering, what are some ways in which you as a chaplain, as a leader of the largest Muslim like association in America, the largest Muslim chaplains association in America, what are you doing as an association, as a leader, to kind of bring about healing, and also help to kind of keep the progress going in this movement? Those two things. What are you doing for healing? And what are you doing to move the progress, keep the momentum going forward?
So that's a very good question, because as chaplains who provide pastoral care, we need sometimes pastoral care ourselves. And so we've been checking on our chaplains, and our chaplains are in the areas of military, hospital, education, community, and corrections. And so we've been checking on our chaplains to make sure that, in fact, they're okay. And tomorrow at 8:30, we're holding a webinar, so to speak, for chaplains, for our member chaplains, to make sure they are okay, and to do some healing work with our own chaplains, because we know that as chaplains, in addition to providing pastoral care, we also need care. And so some of our chaplains are taking this very hard. They're taking it very seriously, because it was, for some chaplains who kind of like live in a sort of like bubble world, all of this was shocking to them. To see this big uproar, they're like, where did this come from? To see this kind of rage and anger that's gone on for so long. This is 2 weeks of this. 2 weeks nonstop, and who knows when it's going to end. And so we are providing this kind of care, but our work continues. Our work continues. For me at Howard University, our students were very upset, in addition to the protests. So we organized a healing circle for our students, and our students organized a healing circle to heal themselves. And they had other students from Howard and other schools come, and we talked about the origins of racism, as it is talked about in the Quran. Dr. Zainab Alwani, who's the head of the Islamic Studies Department in the School of Divinity at Howard University, did that session. I talked about racial oppression and racial trauma, what that does to the psyche, what that does to a young person to continually experience racial trauma and racial oppression, what that does to them. And then our students organize small groups of what we call little healing circles. And they developed 4 questions that they asked each other. You know, how can you advocate for racial justice? What can you do to do some self-healing? What are some things that you do for yourself when you're confronted with these kind of things? And so the work continues. And these are the kind of things that we're doing to not only to heal ourselves, but also to work with healing the populations that we work with.
That's great. I want to ask the question a different way, like Imam Akram. A lot of the like imams from, if you like Imam like Wardi Muhammad, they come from just a grassroots like Booker T or like Washington or like philosophy. of like taking care of self, but may not have the masters of divinity, may not have a network of like support, of help. But you guys are on the front line. What resources do you see that that could be helpful and useful for you doing the kind of frontline work that you're doing right now?
Yes, yes. Yes, I think that is true in many ways. I think the biggest resource that we need from any and everyone would be to have your prayers, to have your du'as, to have your prayers to support us who are working in this fashion, in this capacity as being on front line. But beyond that, I think it becomes really a matter of being in proximity now. So the idea that what resource do I need? I mean, there's, when I think about it within the Muslim community, and I think about myself as an African-American Muslim and how I am relating to the other Muslim brothers and sisters in this moment. I think that for me, what I'm really trying to communicate is really to listen with an ear to hear, and listen with an ear to hear, because what we're seeing right now is not a new thing. No one who has been here, who's had experience, a shared common experience like we have, will ever suggest this is something new. Even though I recognize that something feels different, it's not new. It's not a new thing. And then secondly, the idea for us to say that there's a role for everyone, for us, every one of us to really play. I think the idea that, I was on a panel yesterday and the term ally came up in that, right? And while I understand, I think it's well-meaning, well-intended as a term, it also suggests that like someone who's on the sideline, a bystander, kind of in the shadows or in the background, yet as well-meaning as they may be, but they're not in it. This is not like my issue, but I'm going to lend myself to it. In this moment, I'm really challenging everyone. I'm challenging everyone to not let this moment be seen as their issue or our issue in this, because like our issue, like the issue of Blacks or African Americans, this is our issue collectively as a country. This is our collective issue in this moment. And if we take any other position than that, I think we're missing one of the great opportunities that I believe Allah, God, has bestowed upon us in this moment. I really do. So the idea of us to see ourselves as oneness and really lean in together on a basic human level, right? The idea that a man's life was taken unjustly. Each one of our traditions will speak to that. Each one of our traditions will see that as deplorable. Each one of our position will see that as something that is cursed by God, even, right? So the idea of us being in this moment, I think that the one thing is to lose those artificial lines that we have done by way of language, and really be the best human being we can be in this space, right? So I think that that's one of the things that is happening right now. One of the other things, a little sidebar from what you asked me, but it has also sparked a conversation relative to structural racism, discrimination, and things that has always plagued white supremacy and all those other things that we talk about. That's in full view, but it's also being looked at also from the inside as well, within the Muslim circles right now, within Muslim circles of diverse groups of Muslims, how this structural problem has played and showed itself up amongst us as well. So all these conversations are taking place at the same time. So it's a very dynamic time right now. So it's not only are we dealing with law enforcement on one hand, then we go back to our spiritual group, if you will, too. And then there's some consternation and agitation that's also happening there, right? So it's not this is not for the weary, it's not for the weary in terms of, there's no place to retreat and be comfortable. And I think that this is also part of the wisdom of God in this moment. You cannot be comfortable in this moment. You cannot be comfortable. You cannot sit on the sidelines. You know, I think if we do that, we run the risk, as I said many times, we run the risk of being recorded as being on the wrong side of history. When this moment is written about, you know, 10 years, 50 years from now, you know, the idea of where I was when, what happened, what did I do when, and so on. You know, I mean, we have an opportunity now that we can opt into with our own human agency to do something here. But it'll be a missed opportunity if we don't. So it's a lot of dynamic conversations, and I know that's more than what you asked, my dear brother. But I just thought I would share for a moment, inshallah.
Beautiful,
you know, just to
beautiful.
add to that, no, Brother Dr. Balaf, I could add to that, you know, in terms of the issue of being allies, and is this your issue, and are you really in it? I saw in a group that I'm in where a masjid was offering a flyer, and it said Muslims for Black Lives Matter, and I was thinking, well, wait a minute. I'm Black and I'm Muslim too. I mean, so how could it be Muslims for Black Lives Matter when there are Muslims that are Black? And so in terms of the uncomfortability and people seeing the real picture, that is a redundant statement. Muslims for Black Lives Matter because some Muslims are Black. But when Muslims don't see the real picture that there are Muslims that are Black, they can make a statement like that. They don't see that there are Black people that are Muslims too.
Right.
They don't see the real picture.
Excellent point, Doctor. Excellent.
Yeah, no, that's an excellent point. I mean, Brother Macron, you can just, you know, keep going on if you want. You know, just dialogue.
No, the only thing I would add to it, honestly, is that I think that I just really believe that we're in a moment, right? I think we're in a moment, you know, and, you know, in scripture, in the sacred text, you know, we have these stories in the sacred text. All of us have these stories, you know, whether it was the story of Noah, the story of Moses, you know, et cetera, right? And we all imagine ourselves. We imagine ourselves as being with the good group, right? So hence, if I was in the time of Moses' people, then I would have been the one. We would have been in the group that Pharaoh and his people would have been chasing, if you will, you know, through the Red Sea, right? If I was with Noah, then I would have been the one building the ark, assisting him building the ark, and being mocked at and being laughed at, and so on and so. We see ourselves in that group, right? But somebody was on the other side. Someone was on the other side. So someone didn't register the importance of that moment, the message in that moment, the truth, the reality of that moment. And I think that we have moments like this throughout the duration of the human life, where there are delineation marks. I mean, there are thresholds. They're judgments, if you will, not the big judgment, but they're judgments of the end of one era and the ushering in of something new. And when that happens, the idea is, where were we? Where did we stand in that moment? I just think there's a great opportunity. I'm coming from a very spiritual space right now, but it also manifests itself just on the ground, boots on the ground, what I'm doing, how I'm showing up, and so on and so forth. So just wanted to add that to what I did, Doctor was saying.
That's awesome. So the last question that I will ask, and then I will open it up. I'll turn it over to our sister, who will read off the questions from you guys. The last question that I would ask. So you guys hit on it, you know, this last time around, but you can just bring home the point the final time. If you can tell your Muslim neighbor, your Christian neighbor, your Jewish neighbor, your atheist neighbor who's in the line, Black Lives Matter, what it would mean to get the knee off of your neck for the long term, what would that be?
I mean, it would mean we could breathe. I mean, it would mean an opportunity to breathe freely. You know, for when I offered my students this question last week at our healing session, I asked them the question, when was the first time you were made aware that you were a Black person? When did you come in contact with your racial identity? What happened? What was the experience? Think for a minute. Just think for a minute. When did it happen to you that somebody said to you and made you aware that you were Black? What was the experience like? And they thought for a minute and they shared their experiences, and the experiences were breathtaking. The experiences took their breath away and they had to swallow it. The things that happened to them that made them know, that slapped them in their face, that literally sometimes figuratively let them know they were Black, that literally took their breath away. They couldn't breathe afterward, but they had to swallow it. They had to live with it. And so these kinds of things happen day after day, week after week, year after year, where they just are not able to breathe and live a full life just because they're Black. And then they come into Islam and still, you know, come into Islam and have similar experiences where they're not able to be free. They come to a masjid and do not see themselves in the masjid leadership, in the masjid administration. They don't see themselves. They don't see themselves represented. They hear people talk about Malcolm X and the beauty of Malcolm X, but could Malcolm X come to the masjid and give a talk? Could Malcolm X come and do a khutbah? Malcolm X is the hero. Malcolm X this, but could Malcolm X even come to the mosque? And so they just want to breathe. They want freedom. They want freedom, justice, and equality. They want to live the same life everybody else does. They want their lives to count like everybody else's life count. They want to be able to breathe and live freely. They want to be able to marry the woman that they want to marry, the man that they want to marry, and not somebody to say, you can't marry my daughter because you're not Pakistani, or you're not this, or you're not that. You can't marry my daughter, or you can't marry my son because you're not this or you're not that. No, they want to be free. They just want to be free. Get the knee off my neck so I can breathe. They just want to be able to breathe freely. They want a breath of fresh air.
Yes, yes, yes. You know, I would add to that. That, you know, this is a moment where, you know, what that means is a life that is unencumbered unnecessarily. You know, a life that is not, you know, have obstacles, both, you know, structural and systemic, that's getting in their way. You know, I think most when you're a whole person and you're a sound mind, and you know, you're not asking for anyone to do things that you should do for yourself. I don't think that's what the ask is. I think the ask really is just don't get in my way. You know, don't hinder me. And to try to deny me the freedom and the justice and all of the equality, which, by the way, that resonates so much with me. I was just speaking earlier how when we were growing up, you know, in my home, my parents, when we used to be around the table, that was table talk for us. You know, the idea of, you know, we had these catechisms and things we would talk, and that's how we would be reinforced as values, etc. And one of them was, my father would always lead in with, Islam is freedom, justice, and equality. It's freedom, justice, and equality. Now we know if we're talking, you know, from a technical sense, it's much more than that. It's all sorts of things, but it's what we were crying for. It's the message that resonated with us because of the conditions that we were in. So Islam was a refuge for us. So when we come to that, for this religion for refuge, but we find within it other structures that are trying to choke the life out of us, then I think that's what the ask is. Just let's be Muslims. Let's be believers in God. Let's relate to each other as brothers and sisters. You know, let's look at each other eye to eye, you know, and have a sense of sameness within our hearts and our spirits. And it should show in word as well as in deed with one another, you know. I mean, we're not asking people to be superheroes. We're asking people to be human. We're asking people to be believers in God. I think that's what that would be, in my estimation.
Okay, wonderful. Before I turn it over to my sister, I thought I saw my brother, like Abdullah, my brother like Abdullah from like Duke. If you're still on, this is your brother, like Bilal Ansari. I just wanted to go on record that I love you, and I wish you the best. And I haven't seen your face in a long time. I want everybody to know that I love you. Okay.
Thank you very much. That love and respect is mutual, and more dessert on your end, Brother Bilal. Thank you so very much.
All right. Okay, now I will turn it over to my sister.
All right, salam alaikum. So we have one question. So I'd like to really encourage everybody to type in their questions. But this is from Sherry Roberts. She asks, can we consider, hold on a minute, I just lost my screen. Everyone's typing, see? Okay, she says, can we consider developing and deploying a new paradigm for Ally by creating a new role or focus? And then she suggests we could collaborate to develop a program to train racial justice advocates to be assigned to accompany vulnerable individuals as a sort of spiritual companion and navigator for them. And your thoughts, basically. So she says more, but I just thought I'd end there because there's a lot more in terms of her description. But what are your thoughts on that?
Is that more for the Hartford people, the Hartford administrators to do in terms of developing a program?
I think this is for, in terms of the word ally. So
in terms of creating a program?
So she says in terms of, yeah, in terms of developing a program to train people, something that we could do, something solid that we can do.
Yeah, I think that would be a good thing, something good for Hartford to do in terms of something similar to the Peacemakers program.
You know,
Very good point.
I would say that we, well, I think that is, while I think that is a good step, I don't know that that would be the first step, right? Because I'm saying right in this moment, what we're seeing in this moment is that people have suffered for a long period of time, and right now, so the idea in this moment is, I mean, literally, this is a life and death situation for people in this moment, right? I mean, lives are not just being lost, you know, as this systemic racism has just reared its ugly head again. And again, this is not a new matter. It's not anything that is new. So I would say one of the things that can be done, maybe simultaneously as we're doing some of this other kinds of work, one of the things that can happen or should happen is that those who have perhaps not created, but benefited, right? You weren't the architect of white supremacy, but the idea is that, you know, the way the structure of society is, you have benefited. It has afforded you privileges that others don't have. I'm saying that you leverage your privilege in this moment, and really pivot that and redirect that to have deep investment in those who have been directly affected for so long. I think that these are things that can happen, and if we have a spirit to do that, then it will show itself in multiple ways, it'll show up in multiple ways. But I think the idea of just acknowledging that the way this social construct in America is designed, that I recognize in this moment that I am in a privileged position over African American in particular, but also other brown people and others as well. My proximity to privilege is closer than theirs. So I need to make a choice. I need to make a personal choice at that moment to leverage that and to convey benefit that I've enjoyed. Again, not that we're playing, this is an issue of not placing blame, but it's also sometimes you got to have a recognition moment. You got to look at the map. You got to look at the sea of the world and say, I'm here on this map. This is where I am. And understand that others are in other places on this map, and my proximity to access, whether that's wealth, resource, whatever that kind may be, is easier for me to transfer benefit those who have suffered, those who have been on at the brunt of the violence by the hands of law enforcement, redlining, bad education, health disparities, you know, economic injustices, and so on and so forth, who have really been at the brunt of these things. I'm saying that's one of those things that can happen right away. You know, this is not a situation where what words won't do in this moment. Simply words won't do. Simply words won't do. I mean, we've heard words. We've heard lots of words. We've heard lots of flowery discourse and things of that nature that really didn't move the needle when it came to the quality of life of Black people in this country. We've heard all of these things. So in this moment, for credibility, to be a real ally. And I'm putting air quotes on that because we need to find another reference in my mind about that we need to have a different paradigm when it relates to that and how that happens, and understanding that, yes, you know, there is a situation here where I'm in a position that I can convey benefit to those who have suffered. I think this is extremely important in this very moment. You know, let me say just one other thing too that also shows itself up. You know, and this is part of the conversation we're having within the Muslim community as well, right? The idea that George Floyd was killed by the hands of the police from a police call that happened at a corner store that is run by Arab Palestinians in the community, right? That have been in the community for 25, 30 years, right? And really, if they're truthful and honest with you, the reason that they selected this particular community, that at that time, there was very much gentrified in this moment, it was the heart of the Black community on 38th in Chicago. If you knew what I knew, you know that's where that was the hood. That's where the brothers were at, right? That's where the African Americans were, right? But they chose it not because it was just so attractive to them. It's because they were limited. They couldn't go in other communities and set up shop, right? So they had to choose places that were amenable to them coming in without that. So they found themselves in places and spaces that had already been redlined, that were already food deserts. There were already situations where folks couldn't have the capital to start their own businesses and so on and so forth. So they took advantage of the situation that they did not architect. They didn't create it, but they took full advantage of it, okay? And these are things that we also have to be truthful about in this moment. We have to go back, and I'll give way to our dear sister. We have to go back to as the Reverend William Barber, he says, the Poor People's Campaign, he said, we have to go back to the sacred art of truth telling. The sacred art of truth telling. We got to be willing to tell the truth here about these matters here, and we have to pull back, you know, the level of these and be ready to have some hard conversations. If these conversations that we're having right now don't make you a little uncomfortable, then we're not really getting to it then. We're not really getting to the substance of it. If it doesn't make you squirm and change your position in your seat just a little bit, maybe you need another drink of water or something, or a cup of coffee, who knows, whatever you need, right? But if this doesn't change your disposition and make you a little bit uncomfortable, then we are not speaking about the real issue at hand. We're actually having a surface discourse that we can do all the time. It'll be nice, but nothing will change.
No, and that's a very good point that he's mentioning. And so the Inner City Muslim Action Network, Iman, out of Chicago, is addressing that very issue. They have started what's called the Can I Get a Witness Corner Store Organizing Initiative to address corner stores, because in many Black communities, there are no grocery stores, there are food deserts. It's food apartheid. And so the corner stores are all there is. And so these corner stores, a lot of times, are Palestinians, they're Yemenis, they're Koreans, they're Asians, who provide services behind bulletproof screens. They provide these services, they talk bad to the customers and all of that, but that's all the people have. And so they're starting an initiative to provide training to the store owners so that these kind of things don't happen. Instead of calling the police for a maybe fake $20 bill or whatever, what can you do? Right. What are some other things that can happen? What I gave to my students last week was a training on things you can do instead of calling the police. The police have not always been our friend. I talked about 12 things you can do instead of calling the police. The police, when white people call the police, they don't get killed. When Black people call the police or other people call the police on Black people, we tend to get killed. So what can we do instead of calling the police? We need to know, because the police have not always been our friend. So I share with my students some things they can do instead of calling the police. You come home and your home has been burglarized or whatever, you immediately want to call the police. Don't call the police. Go to the police station to file the burglary report. Because when we bring the police into our neighborhoods and they see other stuff that are going on, okay, that brings a whole lot of trouble into our community that we perhaps did not intentionally want to happen. But when we bring the police needlessly into our communities, things happen. And so
Yes.
we have to be able to know, what can I do instead of calling the police? And so, yes, if you go to Iman, I-M-A-N, imancentral.org. Let me make sure that's the right email address. Iman Central, I-M-A-N central.org. The first thing that should come up is their project, corner store initiative. Can I get a witness? Because there it is. Wonderful. Because they're trying to,
yeah.
Go ahead.
No, I was going to say that it's so ironic you mentioned that. You know, my dear friend Rami Nasashibi,
Yes.
who runs Iman, he was just in Minneapolis with us on Friday
When they launched it. Yes.
Because of this particular issue, and we have been talking about ways to really do this. But what it's doing right now is forcing the African American community, African American Muslim community, also to be right there at the intersection of these things, right? So now we have a situation to where, yes, I'm a Muslim, but I'm also an African American. And if you didn't know me, if you didn't know who I was or read my bio or anything like that, if I showed up in the room at the Hartford Seminary, you would say, who is this black guy? Right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's not until I share my name or I say something about it. So, oh, he's a Muslim. Oh, he's an imam, right? But those identities don't leave. In this racialized, that doesn't leave. The only thing that leaves is what shows up in this space, right? So this idea of understanding that and understanding how the systemic society has also used this as a weapon against me. And when you're not conscious of this, hence calling the police for a small infraction like that, what you have done is you have turned on the machine that has weaponized my skin color against me, and so that the probability that I'm going to have a bad outcome escalates very quickly when the police are in versus another community where someone else happens. You know, we've seen time and time again where I forget the gentleman's name or the person's name who went into the church and killed 9 African Americans, shot them, killed them, murdered them while they were in church service. And the way that the police handled this person,
right?
You know, fed him, took care, and that kind of thing. And you have George Floyd for an alleged $20 bill with 4 officers on him, one knee on his neck, that basically choke the life air out of him for this moment. But this person committed mass murder, and they're taking him to McDonald's to eat.
Right.
How does this resonate with you? How does it, how does this strike us as being anything remotely as fair and justice,
Right.
or to be protected and to be served? How does this do that?
It doesn't.
All right. May we have the next one, please?
All right.
Next, a question.
Yes. So the next question is from Jamie Johnson, and she says, we are in 2 pandemics now: white supremacy and violence, and also the COVID virus. How are you addressing the intersection of these with your constituents? What message would you send to your non-Black or BIPOC is Black, Indigenous, people of color, right, neighbor, regarding racism and the virus?
So they're entwined. More Black people are dying from COVID-19 than anybody else. So the interest is there's an intersection between the two. It's because of white supremacy that more Black people are dying from COVID-19. They're all entwined. There's no separation between the two. They're all entwined. More Black Muslims are dying. There's no separation. Black people are on the bottom of everything that's bad in America.
Yes. You know, it's one, and I'll share this with you, kind of peek behind the curtain a bit. You know, they say when a white person catches a cold, a Black person gets pneumonia, right? So the issue is that everything is always intensified based on this social construct that we're having. Why are Black people dying at a higher rate than others from COVID-19? Is it because we have weak immune systems and all? No, the issue is that because we've been denied health care. right? We eat the worst foods because of food deserts. You know, the idea that we have social conditions that pile on stress and that weaken the nervous system and so on. There's a number of multiplied factors that's all a direct result of the system that we actually find ourselves in. Now, some of this may be taken as like complaining or just, you know, just kind of making light or blaming and so on. But I just really ask us to just take a really an assessment of, you know, the distribution of wealth and other things in this country. And really, when you begin to look at it, not from an emotional, but just from an empirical data, just from a data standpoint, and look at where things are, then these things begin to show themselves up more and more, and you become less surprised at these things, you know. And the fact of the matter is, just like this issue with the police, law enforcement, and how they police or over police the African American community. You know, the idea that lights are being shined on this more and more. You know, thank God, for example, that there was a video. For example, thank God there was a video.
Yes.
As grotesque as this video is, can you imagine the absence of this video? And I'm gonna tell you what the absence of the video looks like, because they didn't know it was a video right away. They didn't know, right? As crazy as they were, they didn't realize this. So when they wrote up the incident about George Floyd, they wrote the incident up as a medical emergency. It was something that happened medical, and then even so let's look at the conspiracy, how it goes all the way up the line, right? So this man was being abused mercilessly for all to see. So right on the scene, right away, there, direct contact. You have multiple officers there. No one intervened. All right, failure number one. And then you go to so now he loses his life, and now he's with the medical examiner. The medical examiner says that the cause of death is inconclusive. They couldn't quite say what was the reason how he lost his life, right? And you go up to the Hennepin County attorney. The Hennepin County attorney was slow to bring forth any charges, then charged the officer, the ringleader of them, if you would, charge them with third-degree murder. Now people say, great, that's a great charge, but again, you gotta peel back a little bit, right? Third degree is one of those things that really didn't apply to that crime. It didn't apply, so their defense can argue this does not apply to a particular crime, and he can get off on technicality as opposed to being held accountable for killing this man. You know, right? So from the police to the medical examiner to the Hennepin County attorney, all really were in cahoots. This shows the power of this system. It's the power of the system. Now, thank God, a video was shown to show what it clearly. And now all of a sudden, there are new reports being filed now. There are new things being filed. But the initial thing that happened, and they showed this. So that was one of the first nights that the city erupted. The city erupted as a result of these things coming out in the way that it did, and the conspiracy to cover up what happened. I'm so grateful in this moment for my dear friend and member of our congregation and the Attorney General of our state, Keith Ellison, who the governor basically intervened and put him over, and then he brought charges more appropriate to this. He saw the same evidence, he saw the same reports that they saw, but he comes to a vastly different conclusion. This is the kind of things that happen in the community all the time. They happen all the time. And again, we're just really speaking to this. And as a person of faith, I would say that we need to be very clear that it's a moral imperative. The truth is a moral imperative, right? I mean, we have to be on the side of truth. We have to be on the side of moral and ethical life, right? And the idea, and if we're not voicing these things, then we have to ask the question, then what are we doing here? What's our purpose in this space if we're not doing that? You know, so I challenge the imams in our community. I've challenged other faith leaders here locally to make certain that their voices are being heard. Because if not that, I mean, to say I don't really want to get involved or to take a standoffish approach, you know, that's, you know, to be complicit in this moment, you know, and there's no room today. There's no room for that in this moment.
Thank you for that. I'm just going to go to the next question. Okay, this is from Abdullah and Tefli, and he asks, who's chaplain at Duke, and he asks, how can educational and formational growth on race issues, how can they be better incorporated into, and he's specified the Islamic chaplaincy program at Harvard Seminary, but you know, if we extend that larger to other programs as well, so how can we be better in addressing this subject in our programs?
I think it depends on the courses and the courses that are taught. I always look at the courses that are taught every semester, and I was really impressed with one of the courses that Dr. Yuskayev was teaching, and I saw he was using a book by Dr. Suad Abdul Kabir, using one of her books. And so it's really the courses that are taught, the books that are used, that incorporate the works by Black authors. I mean, if the courses that are taught at different schools around the country and you only use books by non-Black authors, you're giving a message to the students. I mean, you have to incorporate books by Black authors that speak to the issues and the pain and the angst and the oppression of Black people. I mean, you have to tell people, we have to tell our story. You have to be able to tell the story of Black people by, for, and by Black people. And so that's very important. In the absence of that, you're going to continue to have what's happening today.
I would concur. I think that is definitely a pathway to go in terms of making sure that those voices are heard. You know, and I think also just making sure that the professors, the educators themselves are constantly in a learning mode to explore, you know, and find new voices. I mean, sometimes it's really just the idea of taking responsibility to find other voices to add to these, to supplement the things that have been traditionally taught in these. And then other, you can also just really ask, could you create a safe space enough to ask African Americans and others, how are they feeling about this? You know, how are they feeling about how they've been represented in your class, in your assignment, in your instruction? How do you feel that is this representative of your experience as an African American in this community? I mean, these are questions that if the space is safe enough, if bravery is encouraged in your spaces, then this affords you to ask questions and not stay on the margins. You can get right to it. You know what I mean? And I think that will afford you. I mean, because quite frankly, you know, if you ask the right question, people will tell you whatever you want to know. I think this is an experience.
It's not even just in terms of education and learning, but for young people, it's also, especially for girls and young college students, it's also in terms of beauty and culture. I'm at Howard University, and for Black Muslim girls, they want to be beautiful, they want to be gorgeous, they want to be glamorous, but all the pictures that they see on social media don't look like them. You know, that they're not light, they're not bright, they're not damn near white. You know, their pictures don't look like them. And so to counter that, to counter the insecurities that I know that my students were feeling, we started something called A2 Hijab Fest, where we brought all the Black hijabis that I could find to Howard University. Ibtihaj Muhammad, Ayana Ife, who was on Project Runway, Aisha Prime, you know, Halima Aiden. I brought them all to Howard University. And we had something called A2 Hijab Fest because I want to celebrate the beauty and glamour and gorgeousness of being a Black hijabi. Right. Because it's not even just about education. In every aspect of what it means to be Black, it's denigrated.
Sure.
And so for young women, I have to uplift them in every way because I need them to feel great about being a Black hijabi, about being beautiful and being glamorous. Because if I don't do that at Howard University, they're not going to get it outside of that. Because social media does not give them that kind of empowerment. So it has to
Right.
be done in all areas of our lives: art, culture, beauty, refinement, all of that.
Sure. The only thing I would say left to that, or to add to that, is we have to recognize that there's always been more than one America. There's always been more than one America. You know, there's been, you know, the idea of what was shown to you on television and then what happened at home, right? So, and so, I mean, for us, that's what it was. It was like, and really being so enamored with television and the various, you know, programming that we would see. What was so enamored with that, because that was actually a departure for the reality that we had to deal with on an everyday basis. So it was like going to Disney World for a few months, you know, or going to Wonderland or whatever the case may be, because it was like, wow, like that's how they live. That's really a thing, right? As opposed to having their lives celebrated in such a way. I would say in all the major spheres of life, if you ask, you know, people depending on their culture and race and ethnicity, they will give you a different vantage point. So do we live in the same geographical land? Yes, true. But is our experience the same? Very much no. Absolutely not. And I think that has to be a recognition by even those who are charged with forming the minds of the next leaders. That's a great responsibility for those who are charged with forming and shaping and nurturing the minds of the next leader, to understand that, you know what, there's more than one world. So I need to check in, I need to plug in and understand where they might be at, you know, in their world, you know, and so on and so forth. And it just being interested, you know, to just, it's a, you know, if you want to be interesting, as we need to be interested, you know what I mean? So, and what that means, and not have this stoic approach to education.
You know, in the 1940s, doctors Kenneth and Mamie Clark did a doll study, and they had a white doll and they had a black doll, and they asked children, pick the good doll. Which is the good doll? And they asked black children to pick a good doll. And so the black children looked at the dolls and they picked the white doll. And they said, why did you pick the white doll? And they said, because this doll is a good doll, because this doll is white, because everything they saw on TV and in their experience, white was always good. Everything they saw in TV, black chocolate, dark chocolate, whatever, black night, was always bad. So if we did a similar study for young people, who's an Islamic scholar? If you do a light person, is this an Islamic scholar? If you do a dark person, is this an Islamic scholar? Who would our young people pick if all they see in terms of Islamic scholars are light people? Could a dark person ever be an Islamic scholar? We're having these same challenges today. We have to be able to show our young people representation matters. Black people are Islamic scholars. Black people can be Islamic scholars, but at too many masjids around the country, you will never find a black person as an Islamic scholar. You can never find a black person giving a khutbah. It's a crime.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, so for the next question, I think you've covered a lot of it already, but they said there are structural changes that need to occur. And he says, I also think there is a collective healing that needs to happen. How can we begin that process? So the process of collective healing.
You know, so I think that, go ahead, doctor, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
You know, I mean, before something heals, you know, I mean, I think we have this, you know, this expedience that happens, you know, that we rush, you know, and I had to say, you know, don't rush, right? So the idea is that we haven't even fully stood in the moment. We haven't really fully stood in the moment, right? And so I think that we're in the eye of this, right? We're in the eye of this really right now. So for us to turn the page and talk about healing, but there's been no redress. There's been no you know, there's no way to right the wrongs. You know, how do you heal? How do you heal? Do you want me to heal, or do you want me to bury? What do you want me to do, right? So though, because the idea for me is that if I haven't had a chance to process, and I haven't had a chance to have due process, right, or a chance to really have something, in civilized society, bad things happen all the time. But what makes civilized society civilized is there is a recourse. There's something that can happen to not necessarily cure the situation, because in a situation with George Floyd, George Floyd is never coming home. The officer might lose time away from his family. He might lose his job. He might lose some other things, but he's still alive. He's still alive. So the recourse is not going to be equal, and we're not suggesting that. But at least there's a measure of recourse of justice through this form of recourse that parties are held responsible. And when that happens, only when that really happens are people able to really begin to heal in that way. I mean, these things will always be open. So what tends to happen is, if you look at all those in the case, I just mentioned them all, whether Trayvon Martin, Eric Garner, Tamir Rice, Sandra Bland, these were cases that happened. They were as gross or more than what we saw. All those things were equally in that way, but it was found that there's no harm here, nothing wrong here, and so what they're telling you is, don't trust what your eyes are seeing. Don't believe your eyes. Don't believe your common sense, your sensitivity. Don't believe. Just believe what I say. And what I'm saying here is no crime happened here. Nothing chargeable happened here, right? So again, you're having people who have been wounded multiple times over and over, wounded and more wounded, and then we got this epiphany: we need to heal. How? How do we do that? How do we effectively do that? What has happened is that people have begun to cope. They cope, but not the coping and healing is two different things, and they do that just so they don't lose their sanity. So they can still at least operate and go. So they'll compartmentalize certain things and really bury it, really. But then another incident happens and it comes right back up again. It's going to show itself back up. So it's this roller coaster, emotional, spiritual roller coaster that's happened because there hasn't been any recourse, and that's a society that is not just. It is not just.
I would say for the non-Black people that are listening, check your privilege, check your behavior, check how you respond and how you act towards Black people and with your friends. And do you allow Black jokes to happen that are inappropriate? Check how you interact with Black people. Check what you do, because that is a way how you can change your own self. Start with self. Heal yourself. Because the thing is, a lot of times, work within your own community to change what you can do with white people. White people need to really focus and work on changing in some kind of way what white people are doing toward Black people. And focus on that, because that's a way that can start some healing right there. Help white people see how this issue is so magnanimous in the lives of Black people. Check your privilege. And some people say, well, I'm just colorblind. I don't see color. That's the worst thing ever. Yes. You don't see me as a Black woman. What do you see me as? If to say I'm colorblind, what do you see me as? That's even worse.
I think that if we're going to create a safe space, then we can have candid conversations, because what we have to say is, when you say that, this triggers this in me. Right. Seriously. So we need to be able to have these levels of conversation without it necessarily being attacking, but it's also informing. But in order to be informed, you actually have to want to know. You have to want to know too. So if you don't want to know because it's their problem, then it doesn't matter. And these things find themselves into religious spaces, into spiritual spaces and places. No space is immune to this subject. There's no place you can run and hide. So, at least I don't got to deal with that here. There's no place where we're safe. There's no place. And I think that this is the reality, particularly from a spiritual place, that we have to acknowledge and accept. There's no running and hiding. And the more we try to do that, the more these things are going to continue to erupt in our faces.
And I was speaking of spiritual, I want to just remind us that the Quran says from the Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, in remembrance of me do hearts find rest. You know, too many times we're looking at all of this and we're forgetting God. In all of this, we're not remembering God. And be just, even if it is against yourself. Sometimes justice is against everybody, but even if it is against yourself, be just. And remember him and seeking his help, because he is said to be our best helper. Ask Allah, is this just, Allah? Is what I am doing just? Is what I am doing just? And then lastly, fear Allah.
Right.
Fear God, because God is the best judge of all. God is watching all of our affairs. And do you fear Allah knowing that if you're a corner store owner, you're selling pork or liquor? Do you fear Allah knowing if you are an employer, you're looking over all these good qualified Black people just because you want to hire a white person? You know, are you fearing God in doing all of this? Generally, no. So all of us on here tend to be spiritual people or God-fearing people that we're looking for a spiritual sense of in all of what's going on. God is our best judge. God is absolutely our best judge. And so we have to look to him for our guidance.
Sure. You know, I often say that also that, you know, part of our work is, and this is broad, this is not new, but part of our work is as spiritual people who work in this space is to comfort the afflicted, you know, to provide space and a retreat and a place that those who have been wounded, hurt, scarred can come to be relieved, and to be healed and to be helped to make whole again. So that's part of the work that we do. But there's another part of the work too, and that's also to afflict the comfortable, right? So the idea that we need to agitate in spaces as well where people are just comfortable with where things are, you know, and when they shouldn't be, when there are things that are happening that we shouldn't be okay with this. We shouldn't be okay with this. So this idea of us being and the fact that we are okay with this, and not what your words say, because again, we've heard many words. It's what you do. It's your action to coupled with what you say that is problematic. I'm going to share one quick thing about something that happened here local, which I think to bring the point home. Locally, there was a Muslim, non-Black Muslim, who's a very prominent, in fact, wealthy business person here in Minneapolis. And just recently, since the death of George Floyd, it has come out that there was, you know, on their social media, there were attributed to his family racist and anti-Semitic statements that were made that has caused a great deal of pushback. He's lost tons of business and supporters, and I mean, people are really going at him in this moment, right? And to this point, we had really, you know, been friends as well, right? But when I read the hurtful things coming from not him directly, but his family members and others, but it's attributed to his family. When I read the statements, it's hurtful to me. It's hurtful, you know. So to have a person to reach out to me, he reached out to me. So he came to my home. We sat and we talked about this issue, right? And we went all through it and so on and so forth. And basically he asked me to help him, right? So the idea, so here, I have also been wounded too. I've been wounded too, but in this moment in real time, I'm being asked to help. I'm being asked to help under the auspices of we're Muslim brothers. I'm saying, I want you to understand the dynamic, the quandary that's happening right now, right? And how layered this is, right? So the issue becomes one of, you know, when the word was plastered, when the N word was being used and plastered all over, and now has gone viral. You know what I mean? And it was attributed to. So do I not recognize that? Do I put that aside and just put on? You know what I mean? It's like we have these different lives, these bifurcated lives. I got to put something down to stand something else up, and these are the areas that we find ourselves in, right? So I sat with him, we talked, we went through this whole process. We have a very candid and real conversation, you know. And we said some things, you know, to one another that he, you know, I had to say some things to him based on what was presented. Now the issue is, I told him, I said, your words are not enough. Your words are not enough. You have to work in good faith at this point and demonstrate what your words are saying, right? And to which he agreed, and we came up with an approach that we think will help at least to begin to remedy, in some cases, some of the hurt that has been caused in this situation. But I'm saying all this to say that at many times that we're still called upon to solve issues that we're directly affected by. Even having this conversation about race and discrimination in this very moment, in this form right now, do you know that we have to go somewhere within our own selves, because we have to relive this in this moment right now.
Right.
When we actually have to relive these experiences in this moment in order to educate and share in a non-threatening way, in a educational way, to share what I expect. But you can't go there and not be authentic if you're not willing to relive it a little bit too. So sometimes you hear the pitch in my voice, right, raised, or I get more animated, right? What you're seeing is my trauma coming up. You see my trauma that's been inflicted. So you're seeing it in real time. You're like, wow, he's excited about that. This is my trauma, and I'm not even always conscious of that. I'm not even always in real time. I'll go back. My wife will tell me, "Wow, you were worked up." Was I? Was I worked? I didn't even know that. I didn't even know that, right? But I'm just saying the effect of how this has works on your psyche, on all parts of your nervous system and everything else, that I have to go back and relive some of these things, even though I'm scarred. I'm not fully healed. I'm wounded in this moment, but I'm called on now to be the mediator, the ones who makes things right again too, as well, right? So these are these interesting intersections that many of us have lived in and at for many years of our lives, and I just want people to really understand what that means too, particularly as faith leaders that are people that are African American and other people of color as well.
You know, and these are the effects of racial oppression and trauma that sometimes other people don't understand, that we have to juggle our own the effects of racial oppression on ourselves, and having to manage that, and then having to deal with other people's lives. I'm in a group of education chaplains, and we're working on these issues, and one of the other chaplains said something that triggered something in me, and I responded in a negative way. And then when I read what, I was like, wow, did I say that? I really shouldn't have said that. I mean, and I was like, but I meant it, but you know, I really shouldn't have said that, but it just triggered something in me. And another chaplain called me, and I was like, wow, I'm really sorry I wrote that. But, you know, stuff triggers us, even though, you know, we're in leadership positions, because it's a daily onslaught. And sometimes it's years of stuff that we have to deal with. You know, I remember when my daughter was born. My daughter is lighter than me. And I knew immediately, okay, this is going to be a problem for her. Because she's lighter than me, and she's going to grow up. And I know that the issues of what it means to be a darker woman. And so I had to rear her in a way that she could consider herself beautiful as a darker woman. Why do I have to do that? Mm-hmm. America has created a system and in a world where, why can't I just mother her regularly like everybody else? Yeah. But no, but because of white supremacy and racism and colorism, I have to rear her in a certain way because she's darker than me. And I don't want her to have to suffer the additional oppression of being darker than her mother. And being called tar baby and black child, and why are you darker than your mother, and all of the things that come with the variations of hues and colors that from the slave master. Mm-hmm. And so it's so much, but the basic is, as Muslims, we're taught to fear Allah. In Christianity, the Bible says the beginning of wisdom is the fear of the Lord, the fear of God. If we just try to be as we are taught to be as Muslims and Christians, and whatever the faith tradition we follow tells us to be, we would do a whole lot better. And as you mentioned, racism is the one sin that we accept. And we have accepted it, and we move right along, and we do very little to change it. But it is a new day, and we can begin to do some things different, inshallah.
Yeah. Inshallah. Inshallah. Yeah.
Thank you, Nisa. We have another question from Yaman Atasi, and he says this is for both of you. He says, recently, some have suggested doing a Muhajir Ansar pairing between predominantly black masajid in the cities and predominantly brown masajid in the suburbs. Do you have any thoughts as to the viability of this suggestion?
I'm not sure. I guess I hadn't heard that, but I trust that's happening. I think efforts and they would need to be, you know, creative, but also if they're done with sincerity, you know, I think that these things can perhaps you know, move the needle in some way, shape, or form. I think that they can, but I would also just caution that, you know, another program without doing the deep work within us is just like exercise. You know, it's exercise, right? So I think that if coupled with that is doing some deep work and being real comfortable being uncomfortable in this, I think if that's also a part of it, which I'm not sure if it is or is not, but I'm saying if that is, then I think it will be beneficial. If it's not, then again, I think it'd be more of an exercise of sorts that won't necessarily reach the aims of the stated aims or outcomes of the project.
I agree. I think that, and that's going to vary from city to city, because it's going to look like slave master, slave, because a lot of the inner city masjids, they are totally underdeveloped. And then these other masjids are fabulous and gorgeous. And so the resources, so that's a major undertaking.
Yeah.
Next question. There are many. How can I help get African American Muslims share their voices to non-Muslims who are African American Christians or who are Jewish, and other Christians and Jews?
Like, for example, like what?
I don't
understand the question.
Basically, she wants to know how
how to connect with Black Christians,
or how she can get the voice. I mean that how can she share the African American Muslim voice with other communities?
You know, I think it depends on the situation. I'm sorry, Doctor. I didn't mean to interrupt you.
Go ahead.
I think it depends on, you know, what the aim is. So, for example, if this is a person who is speaking from a level of, I'm going to call it privilege, but I don't mean it in the, but I mean they have access or a platform that maybe an African American Muslim does not, and they want to share that platform. I think that's a good thing. And they said that's what we call leaning in at this point, right? The idea is, say, look, I recognize that in my sphere that I operate in right here, I got access to all this right here, a world that you probably have not been exposed to. But me trying to be a good human being, understanding that there are things up here that you need for your life too, then I build that bridge to allow you to make that happen and to like give you access. If we're talking in that way, I think that yes, I think that's commendable. That's an admirable thing to do. But I also think too is that, again, understanding and depending on the level of experience and or suffering and or abuse that someone had, they may be reluctant to just be they don't want to be like the dog and pony show here either. You know what I mean?
I was gonna say that because I've turned down some speaking engagements for that very reason. I don't want to be somebody's dog and pony show. I don't want to be there just to say, oh, I have a Black Muslim here and let's look at her. I'm not interested in that.
Exactly. So it has. I mean, again, this is as much about connecting the hearts of people as it is about just putting some outward display about that, because listen, people understand and they know if there's sincerity behind this. You can feel, you can sense it, you know it, or if I'm just, you know, a prop in a situation. People, you understand that as well, because it happens all the time. And they call it, you know, they appropriate, you know, they appropriate my story, they appropriate my situation so that they can, you know, have some validity on certain other, it happens all the time. And sometimes it happens even when knowingly, I mean, and I have to measure, is the gain worth it versus not? You know what I mean? I mean, so it's all these other conversations that are having in our head. You know, they call it, I forget the scholar, he called it like double consciousness. You know, the idea, you know, you're operating, you know, with you're thinking, but you're also trying to figure out what they thinking. But I'm speaking to you in real time. You know, the idea is thinking, you know, I mean, and this is a real to do. It's something that happens all the time, and it's another trauma again that's inflicted when people are trying to really engage as well. So a lot to be said on this idea, a lot to be said on this subject. And again, we're really just scratching the surface on what this is going to really take for us. So.
I just wanted to read a comment. I just realized we're 2 minutes away from 6 o'clock. But this is from Yaheskel Landau, and he says, to heal or cure an unhealthy situation, the pathology needs to be diagnosed correctly. If white supremacy is not named and its sinful symptoms identified, such as poverty, discrimination, double standards of injustice, police brutality, mass incarceration, and all the other forms of systemic oppression, then how can healing happen? Imam Makram is right. Without redress, there can be no healing. So that was a comment that he made. And I think I'd like to pass it back to Dr. Ansari to close us off, inshallah. But thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Yes. So I want to, you know, thank our host, I thank our guests, and also our host, Sister Ida. I think also like Harvard Seminary. Think like Susan, who's done a lot of the logistic work behind the scenes. I think my co-director, Mr. Yuskayev, Dr. Yuskayev, thank you for all your support. Sister Ida, thank you, Dr. Nisa, thank you, also the Imam Makram. I also want to thank everybody for attending, for your questions, for your thoughtfulness, and for your continued prayers for the deep work that we have to do on this issue to keep it going forward. Thank you for all the alums who showed up. Thank you for all the students who are here, and keep us all in your prayers. And we'll see you next time. And again, we say that this is not one fight, but this is all of our fights, and I look forward to seeing you on the front lines. All right. Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam.